Okay, so the Athenian greatness lasted for about 50 years, where they created a Delios League, and again, different city states kind of paid them for protection and so forth. And life was pretty good. In 431 BC, Athens and Sparta, who were complete opposites of the spectrum, really started having a lot of conflict. And so the Civil war lasted for 27 years between these two Greek city-states. It was fought primarily on the Peloponnesus Peninsula, where Sparta is located. And Sparta actually won this civil war, but Athens really has remained the center of the Greek culture. It's the capital today. So, because they were so well rounded, I think they kind of elevated up above Sparta, who was one minded and one thought process towards the military. Now, the Persian Wars earlier that I mentioned were recorded by Herodotus. The Peloponnesian Wars were written about by Thucydides. And the difference, remember, from those two people is the fact that Herodotus believed that the Greeks were fighting with their gods right beside them. There was a lot of myths that was involved as well as part of this war. With the Peloponnesian War or Civil War, Thucydides recorded it as is. So there was no idea that gods were fighting on either one of these sides. All right, so on our map, we've got a variety of city-states already labeled, the four battles, the two seas, the island of Crete. And so now we're going to label the Peloponnesus Peninsula, and it's that entire area there. You can see it's connected right here. So it's not really an island, but it looks like it almost could be an island. All right, moving on. Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic era, which began in about 335 BC. Alexander the Great was the son of Philip II of Macedonia, and although he was not a Greek, because he was tutored by Aristotle, he was Greek enough to be kind of considered to be a Greek leader. So when he controlled Greece and other areas, he was kind of considered Greek enough that they call it the Hellenistic era, even though they weren't really ruled by a technical Greek person. Alexander the Great conquered the largest empire in that the world had seen up to this point. He took the Greek and Macedonian armies and defeated the Persians, and he created a palace that um, or he lived in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. And since he was Greek enough, there was a lot of blending of Eastern and Western influences because he conquered Persia and Egypt, and he went into India, and he conquered Greece and, of course, Macedonia. So a lot of Greek education and ideas really advanced. The cities of Athens and Alexandria, Egypt, were kind of home bases for Greek knowledge and Greek education. So Alexandria, of course, was named after Alexander the Great. Now, he died at 33 years old. There's a lot of question about how he died. He didn't have a successor, so that was going to be an issue, but he was 1 month shy from being 33 years old. They're not sure if he was poisoned by a son. He was not sure. It's not sure if he had a malaria relapse because he had suffered from malaria earlier, or he did. He was well known for drinking quite a bit, so they're not sure if that was part of it either. Either way, it started spreading the idea of um, the Greek culture to more lands beyond Greece and Macedonia. So Alexander the Great, you can see this huge green shaded empire. This is all the area that he controlled, and it's listing different battles that I'm not going to have you know just because it wasn't necessarily Greek battles. All right, Greek gods and oracles. You've probably studied a little bit about this before. Greeks, of course, were polytheistic. They believed that gods were everywhere and caused everything to happen, good or bad. Each city-state would build a temple or have a god or a goddess as their patron god or goddess that oversaw their cities. The gods were looked at as human-like, and they got angry, they expressed happiness or love, and so they had a lot of the same human-like emotions. The gods, of course, lived on Mount Olympus, which we'll label here in just a little bit, or you can look at page 135 in your book. And the oracles were the priest or priestesses that predicted the future. And Greeks, the leaders of Greeks, always went to the oracles to find out, should we start this battle? Are we going to win? Should we do this? Should we do that? And so they kind of were the ones that these priests and priestesses would talk to the gods. So it's kind of like the oracle bones of ancient China, where they wrote messages to the gods and then the priest, read the cracks. So all leaders always went to these oracles and really took it quite serious. They built temples for their gods and goddesses, as I mentioned. The Parthenon is a perfect example of that. It's in orange, as mentioned earlier, because it's a building that still exists. It's a good example of Greek architecture and religion. And once again, they didn't go to these temples to sit down and worship. They were only there as an honor or a tribute to the gods or goddesses. All right, so Mount Olympus is the only mountain on the list, so you can put that up there at the top by the triangle. All right, moving along. There are lots of Greek gods and goddesses, and you've probably studied a little mythology throughout your education at some point. We're just going to do the 12 major gods that are mentioned in the reading. Mythology, of course, is not only a word that is Greek because it ends in ology, but the whole idea of studying Greek myths is something that we do in our school. So the first one is Zeus, and of course, he was at the top. He was the king of all gods. He controlled the weather, and of course, the thunderbolt was his symbol. The Olympics were created in his honor, so that's another contribution. Aphrodite was the goddess of beauty and love, and I'm sure you've heard of things like an aphrodisiac, something that, like chocolate, for example, they use as an aphrodisiac. They say it kind of, gets you in the mood for romance. Apollo was god of the sun. He was the patron of archery, music, prophecy, and medicine. So the Hippocratic Oath has the symbol of Apollo as one of its, designs. And of course, we use things like, the space mission Apollo 13, named after that. Ares, the god of war. Ares was the patron god of Sparta, of course, makes sense. So he was the god of war and combat, just fighting all in general. Artemis was a goddess, and she was the goddess of the moon. She was also a guardian of the cities, young animals, women, and hunting. Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, was the goddess of wisdom. And it makes sense that Athens was a location that really encouraged education and wanted this creative thought because Athena was the goddess that oversaw them. Demeter was the goddess of crops, grains, fruits, and agriculture. Dionysus was the god of fertility, joyous life, hospitality, wild things, and wine. Sounds like a fun kind of god, right? Hephaestus was the only ugly god. Remember, Greeks in their paintings and sculptures always portrayed people and gods as perfect specimens. Well, Hephaestus was the only one that was depicted as ugly. He was the god of fire and forage and all artisans. Hera, goddess, not necessarily even a goddess, more like a protectress of marriage, since she was the wife of Zeus. She was also the protectress of children and the home. Hermes was the god of orators and writers and commerce, protector of thieves and mischief makers, the guardian of wayfarers, the messenger to mortals. So Hermes with the winged shoe, of course, is his symbol, and we use that today for track. Poseidon is the god of the seas and the ocean, and he was also the earth giver of horses to mortals. And so a lot of statues depict him with horses, and of course, our typically in water fountains. Education in Greece. Of course, in Athens, it was different than in Sparta, than in Corinth, and so forth. But there were 4 cycles, and the education phase was in the first 2 phases of life. The pois and the ephebi, those were the childhood and the youth. The hour was the man, and the geron is the elder. And geron is a prefix referring to older people, like gerontology is the study of the aging body, or um, geritol is a vitamin for people that are 65 and older. Young boys, their education, they started at 6 or 7. They went to private schools because they were the wealthy upper class boys, and these schools consisted of anywhere from 60 to 100 boys. Slaves were the really ones that monitored their schoolwork, not their parents. So slaves would walk them to and from school. They would make sure that they got their work done and that they were behaving. So what was school like? They sat on a typical bench. They used a stylus and a wax-coated tablet. They did use paper, but that was only for really special events. The wax-coated tablet, really, you just kind of etched with the stylus into it, and so you just scratched out what you were doing, the math problems or the poetry or whatever you were writing. Started at 7 in the morning, and it pretty much lasted most of the day and into the afternoon. All right, what subjects were they taught? Of course, reading and writing in Greek. They were taught arithmetic, and this was used with an abacus, which I'm not really a firm understander of what goes on with the abacus, but I think Mr. Parson actually has one and he could probably explain that to you. But it's the ancient form of a calculator. They learned to play a musical instrument, the double flute called the analos. They would sing songs, recite Homer's poetry from the Iliad and the Odyssey. And then after age 12, they did all those same things, but now they added wrestling. As I mentioned, it was an important school for them. They went to the palestra, which is the Greek word for gymnasium, because the word gymnasium is actually Latin. They were learning to wrestle, to swim, and to use a bow and arrow. And clearly, this was helping them prepare to be a soldier. So after 15 and 16, they concentrated on more a physical program to definitely prepare them for war. So running, jumping, hunting, of course, with the bow and arrow, driving war chariots, hurling the javelin. And that's, of course, where the Olympics come into play as well. They were also taught oratory because these upper class men were probably going to be involved in politics, so they needed to be good at public speaking. They learned different things in science that we learned with all those people, dealing with, the circumference of the earth and all the other people that we mentioned earlier. And philosophy, again, that love of wisdom and that deep thought. And then, of course, history, especially Greek history, but other history as well. Once they get to 18 or 21, they entered the Athenian Soldiers League, and this was a 2-year kind of a police service, if you will. They protected the borders and they kept order in Athens. They really didn't go off to war until after 21. And so this was kind of preparation for that. So the idea of the police and the word for police are both Greek. Girls, of course, were taught the domestic sciences. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, but they also learned to read and write in Greek. They only did reckoning, which was very simple mathematics. Spinning and weaving, of course, was important, and embroidering. They would get to sing and dance and maybe play an instrument or recite some poetry. Sparta women had it much better. Sparta women could actually participate in athletic exercises. They had a lot more equality than other Greek women. And again, they wanted strong Spartan women to give birth to strong Spartan boys. And if they didn't give birth to a strong boy, they sometimes left the babies out in the woods, and they were done because they weren't going to be good enough soldiers for them. All right, so let's label the rest of the map. We need to label the city of Delphi, which we will talk about in the movie or in the film about the Olympics. Olympia, of course, and Corinth. All right, so watch or read pages 12 through 14, and then we're going to watch the Greek Olympic video, and we'll do a worksheet along with that.